still has championship point.
Five, please.
He's done it.
Boris Becker took the tennis world by storm when he won Wimbledon, aged only 17.
Boris was one of the greatest players there ever was.
He became a symbol of success that a whole country was hitching its wagon to.
Boris, congratulations. Can we have a few words with you?
He became as famous as a rock star,
Ladies and gentlemen, Boris Becker.
with luxury homes across the globe.
Everybody wanted to offer Boris untold riches. The money was just flooding in.
It's not the life of a normal person.
He was headline news.
New women just kept coming. I've never spoken to him again.
The phone rang, and it was a source giving me a tip-off about Boris Becker, a possible love child, and a broom cupboard at the Japanese restaurant, Nobu.
But the hero crashed and burned.
Boris had hid the horses in the bedroom because you have to pay taxes on the horses, and he hadn't paid the taxes. You walk into the bedroom and there's a horse.
Boris arrived and he was cocky. I said, you may have been the greatest on your courts, but now you're walking into mine.
Tennis champion Boris Becker has been declared bankrupt.
He was sentenced to 2 years and 6 months in prison.
This is Boris Becker as never seen before. His story told by those who know him best. His friends, his coaches.
We can start.
And his women.
There's just something about this guy. He is sweet. He is kind. He is funny. But he's also arrogant. He's a liar.
Superstars that have been big when they're kids, it's a disaster waiting to happen.
Well, I remember the phone rang, and it was the managing partner of Baker McKenzie's Miami office. And he was like, Robert, get over here. Boris Becker's coming in for a divorce. We need you.
Boris and Barbara Becker had been Germany's top celebrity couple for 7 years when the shock news broke of their divorce. Barbara fled to their home in Miami with their sons to begin proceedings.
Barbara filed an action in state court in Florida so that she could come here, she could get her alimony, she could get her child support in far in excess of what she was able to in Germany. So Barbara was financially going to be much better off getting divorced in Florida.
As soon as Boris arrived in Miami, he was served with divorce papers.
I had learned from Barbara from the outset that Boris was extremely controlling, was not terribly generous, and we wanted fairness. Once he's served, he's in court in Miami. That got us away from this outrageous prenuptial agreement, and it made us the favorites. That's why I get the big bucks.
The reason for their divorce was soon to become clear.
I was in the newsroom one day and the phone rang, and it was a tipster. The tip-off said that Boris Becker had had a child with someone other than his wife. We needed a picture. That's what we needed for the paper. The tipster then told me where the mother would be, so we arranged to be by the mother's house. This was the actual story that we printed. Boris Becker's secret child, exclusive, Brit baby is real reason for marriage split. Boris made love to me in a broom cupboard at a restaurant called Nobu, and there's the picture of Angela with Anna. It was an incredible shock at the time. Boris Becker had this fairly squeaky clean image, I'd say. He was married, he had children. Here is this man having quite a lurid encounter with a woman. I remember going back to the office, restaurant, and I said, no, honestly, the restaurant was a Nobu. And they go, what, Nobu? What? Are you making this up?
Es war sensationell. Der Dezember 2000 war wahrscheinlich der aufregendste im Leben von Boris Becker. Bild-Zeitung war jeden Tag voll. Es kam heraus, dass er mit Angela Ermakova, dem unehelichen Kind Anna in England.
Boris initially denied paternity, and he came up with a particular explanation of his own.
I had the luck on the flight back from Miami. One of his lawyers told me and that he had written a letter to the lawyer of Angela Ermakova. Your client had stolen the sperm of my client, Boris Becker. For us, it was a fantastic story.
When that story broke, it really freaked Boris out. The press was relentless. Boris had given me the same story, that she had given him a blowjob, and then she had kept the semen that was in her mouth and she impregnated herself. And Boris's problems there were going to have to be dealt with in the UK.
Barbara was angry. Barbara was embarrassed. She was the man's wife, had 2 children, and he's publicly having a child while he's still married.
Becker v. Becker was going to be a huge case. We have a lot of international divorces in Miami, but you rarely have something that had the kind of publicity that Becker v. Becker did.
The media frenzy was overwhelming. I had no idea that this would become such a cause célèbre.
Boris Becker's arrived in America for a courtroom showdown with his estranged wife.
Boris arrived, and he was very cocky. Boris. And I said, Boris, you may have been the greatest on your courts, but now you're walking into mine.
At the preliminary hearing, Boris attempted to exclude the media from the court proceedings and prevent his finances from being made public.
Mr. Becker, why have you asked this court to seal the court file and to close the proceedings to the press?
Weil ich Angst habe das Leben von meiner Kinder und von meiner Frau.
Boris started out in a victim mode, but he can't pull off playing victim because it is nowhere in his DNA. From a very young age, he was taught to behave as a champion. I got right to the point with him. I accused him of dishonesty.
I respectfully suggest that you're lying.
Objection, Your Honor.
I respectfully I won't suggest anything. I won't suggest anything.
Strike it.
Sir, withdrawn.
And I was aggressive towards him. I was, absolutely.
What we're all concerned about is protection of the children. However, by using any burden of proof, I don't find even competent substantial evidence of any threat of physical harm. I just don't see it, folks.
The court agreed that he'd have to do full financial disclosure, that the trial would be a public trial. We don't have secret trials in America. Period.
Boris lived off of his name. That was his brand. And if the press got into his finances, there was going to be things that they could exploit. And he was really concerned about it because it was going to have a direct impact on his financial bottom line. Boris's income was going to be made known. And the closer we got to the hearing, the more concerned Boris became.
His attorneys asked me if I'd be willing to meet and discuss settlement.
Well, I would consider that Mr. Becker's attorneys lost the first round. Have a nice day.
It was a fair deal, and he honored the deal.
An ugly divorce battle is finally over for German tennis star Boris Becker and his wife. Becker and Barbara have settled a dispute involving finances and the custody of their 2 children. The terms of the agreement were not made public, but Becker's wife will remain living in Miami with the children indefinitely.
Well, to be honest, Boris was happy to settle. The press was smelling blood.
When he lost his effort to seal his financial information, it wasn't for the reasons he testified to in court. It was because he knew he had all these other investigations going on in different parts of Europe involving taxes.
A few weeks later, a paternity test confirmed that Boris was the father of Angela Ermakova's baby. Boris agreed to settle in court, reportedly paying Ermakova over £2 million, plus over £5,000 a month maintenance for baby Anna. The following year, Boris was back in court again, this time in Germany. He was found guilty of owing 1.8 million euros in tax and received a 2-year suspended prison sentence. He narrowly escaped going to jail, this time.
If you having girl problems, I feel bad for you, son. I got 99 problems, but a bitch ain't one.
By the time he was 36, costly court cases behind him, Boris was once again single.
It always was my dream to come to New York and dance. So I joined the Dance Theater of Harlem. The first time I met Boris, we were on the dance floor. And of course, you know, you can spot Boris because he's very tall. And yeah, he had some moves, actually, surprisingly. We were dancing together, and there was definitely a spark. The next time we saw each other was a month later, and what really struck me was we spent the night, but he slept on the couch. So he was really a gentleman. When we were together, it was really exciting. We were in love. I moved to Munich. The transition was, which word can I use? It was a lot.
Als bekannt wurde, dass Boris mit Caroline Rocher eine Liebschaft hatte oder eine Beziehung einging, das war die erste, sagen wir mal, offizielle Beziehung nach der Trennung und Scheidung von Barbara. Bei Boris war es immer so, bei neuen Partnerschaften, Seite 1, Covergeschichte, Schlagzeile.
We were not living together. Boris was based in Zurich at the time. I guess that's why the relationship didn't last, because we were not seeing each other enough. When the announcement was made that we were breaking up, I was in the French Caribbean visiting my father. I guess the press didn't know where I was. But then they found me on the beach. It was devastating because, you know, dealing with a breakup is not easy, but then, you know, it's all publicized and everything, so it makes it even harder.
After Caroline, Boris had a series of short-lived relationships and spent 3 years with Charlili Kersenberg. But by the summer of 2008, he was engaged to his former manager's daughter, Alessandra Meyer-Walden, whom he had known since she was a child.
Ja, die Beziehung von Boris Becker und Alexandra Meyer-Walden war total überraschend. Der Altersunterschied war auch relativ groß. War natürlich auch wieder ein großes Medienthema, ja.
You know, in my mind, at 24 years old, this was only about 10 years after my father had passed, I felt safe. And because in the back of my mind, you know, I always sort of had my father and him trusting Boris and treating Boris like, you know, family. Maybe this is where I'm supposed to be. Maybe, you know, this is, you know, the crazy love story with all this history, you know, the happy ending. You know, the story was, it was like a fairy tale.
He took Alessandra to New York, and he called me during the night and said he was unhappy. She had brought some friends, and she spent more times with the friends than with him. And that was for him the final thing, to quit the relationship very quick.
I knew Boris was Boris, but I had no idea what came with it. His personal life was a mess. There were divorces, there were children, there were breakups. We had a trip to Miami before our breakup in which we had spent time with his children, and I got very sick. Boris was not happy with that, and all of a sudden he was not taking my phone calls and he started acting strange. I didn't know where he was, so of course I called, and of course I messaged. My message that I wrote to Boris said, well, if you're not answering and you're not communicating with me, I guess our engagement is off, ? And he took that message, took it totally out of context, and with that message went to the Bild Zeitung and said, look, this horrible young 24-year-old girl broke up with me, Boris Becker, over text. The way that I found out about our engagement being off was through the headline in Bild, portraying himself as a victim, cleaning up his image so that he would look good. To this day, I've never spoken to him again. So he threw me under the bus.
Earlier that very same year, Boris had proposed to Charlili Kersenberg. But he had suddenly called off that engagement too.
One day, my phone rang and I saw his name, Boris, and I'm like, oh, that's odd. But I answered, and Boris came to the flat. And that wasn't the first time I had seen him again after the whole 3 months of engagement. I was like, wow, and then, oh. And it was just like it was nothing had happened. I always still felt very much connected to Boris. There was just nothing that this man could do wrong in my eyes, just nothing. And we looked at each other, and it's like, yeah, let's try to make this work. I love you, I've made mistakes, and I was just happy to be in his arms, and we both wanted it. You know, we both wanted it.
Also, ich hab gedacht, ist ja, wenn Boris sagt, ich sag was an, dann dürfen wir gespannt sein. Was kann es sein? Ich will gar nicht raten.
Also, wir werden am 12. Juni in St. Moritz heiraten.
Nein, schon wieder. Mensch. Also, ich hab gedacht, ist ja, haben wir. 12. Juni sein muss.
Boris thought it was a great idea to announce it on a live TV show that we were getting married. Everything in Boris' life is big, and that's who he is, and I loved every minute of it.
Ja, wir sind durch diverse Höhen und Tiefen gegangen, seit fast 4 Jahren zusammen. Letzten Sommer habe ich mich mal leicht verlaufen, aber sie hat mich wieder aufgenommen ins traute Heim und ich will sie nicht mehr loslassen.
I loved that I was finally claimed in public. This is the girl I'm gonna marry. We were so intertwined with each other. We couldn't stop touching each other. I can't describe my love other than I want to be so close with you that I wish I could crawl inside of you and just sit myself up. This is where I want to be. Gosh, it was beautiful. The circle was complete when I realized that I was pregnant.
A year after their marriage, Charlili gave birth to a son. She had been orphaned at the age of 3, and becoming a mother was her ultimate goal.
It was just a beautiful moment in life.
Charlili is not at liberty to express anything about her son in public.
Wir gehen zur Wand vorne, wir gehen zur Wand.
Boris and Charlili settled in Wimbledon with their new son. Boris was working as a commentator, but being on the tennis sidelines wasn't enough.
When you concluded your life's work at such a young age, that's a terribly difficult pill to swallow. Then the question is, now what? And I'm sure for Boris that was a horrible thing.
He needed to be famous. And if you don't become famous through something you do good, you can become famous in getting ridiculous. It was just too much attention that he had before. He wanted to have that again, and you have to accept that it's over.
For Boris, it was important to play a big role. He wanted to be known as a very successful businessman. He found people who wanted to do business by using his name and taking away money from him. And there were some investments in startups, in oil mines in Nigeria, all that, which did not work.
Die Leute ihm nahegelegt haben, es ist ein tolles Invest, du kannst eine riesen Rendite machen, die er aber nicht richtig überprüft hat. Ja? So, und dieses blinde Vertrauen ist ihm an vielen Stellen einfach um die Ohren geflogen. Wo die Ölmine in Nigeria halt doch nicht so Öl abgeworfen hat, wo der Dubai Tower nicht entstanden ist.
After 10 years of rumors about problems in Boris's finances and business enterprises, in 2013, he was back to what he was good at, tennis. Coaching the world's #1 player, Novak Djokovic. He was also making the most of the interest in his love life.
Es gab Geschichten darüber, dass er Probleme hat, geschäftlich und auch privat. Dass es Schulden gibt. Dann haben wir darüber unterhalten, lass uns eine Biografie machen, eine Autobiografie von dir, autorisiert. Und er wollte seine Sicht der Dinge in diesem Buch schildern. Wirklich, Boris Becker, so habe ich es gesehen.
Written over a year, the book focused intimately on Boris's relationships with the women in his life.
Dementsprechend hat er sehr offen die Geheimnisse über seine Frauen erzählt. Ja, und dann ging es natürlich darum, wie ist die Scheidung von Barbara gelaufen, wie hat er Caroline Rocher kennengelernt, was war wirklich mit Angela Ermakova und Anna, wie hat er Lily in Miami kennengelernt, wie ist die Hochzeit verlaufen.
When I found out that there was another guy hanging out with Boris talking about all of his ex-wives, that's when I thought, all right, really? You really feel the need to talk about your exes? Like, did you have too much time on your hands? It annoyed me. I thought it was morally wrong on every level.
Das ging unheimlich ab, gleich am Anfang. Ersten 1-2 Wochen, wir waren Spiegel-Bestsellerliste Platz 2. Ich glaube, es hat sehr gut verkauft, weil es gibt kaum jemanden, den Boris nicht interessiert. Also manche mögen ihn, manche hassen ihn, aber es gibt wenige Menschen, die sagen, er ist mir egal.
It was the most embarrassing book launch. I was there. It just didn't sit right. Nothing sat right, the whole book thing. It wasn't just because of me, but gosh, all the other women. And it was in the past. We had overcome so much. Why bring it up? It was a very, very self-centered... It was a book for him without the consent of the other girls. But I guess if you want to sell something and you have a name like Boris Becker, it will sell. Simple as.
Schöner Herr Becker, ja, dieses Buch in die Hand nehmen, Handnehmen, einmal das Lächeln.
The beginning of our marriage and the relationship was bliss. It was great. A couple of years later into our marriage, you know, stuff happened. And you've got your suspicion. I'm not saying I'm a detective, but I trust my gut feeling. So it was up and down we had, you know? I've always had my suspicions. And his reputation isn't, you know, he wasn't a reborn man.
Més coses, l'ex-tenista alemany Boris Becker ha evitat en el darrer moment la subhasta de la seva finca a Artà, la propietat ubicada a Son Coll.
With Boris's marriage crumbling, the £15 million home he had built in Mallorca was in the news, over debts of €500,000 owed to its builders.
Well, the finca was his pride and joy. We just loved going there because it's so secluded. There was no paparazzi. You walk in and you go, leave everything behind.
The debts he did not pay because nobody understood that he will not pay gardeners, workers, people who need the money. I heard from people there who got bankrupt with their business because they did not get this money from him. Things about money, he was very rude. Normally, he was very warm and friendly to people. But concerning money, he was a totally different person.
Also die einzige Idee, eine tolle Ferienimmobilie zu kaufen, die im Wert steigt, hat das Gegenteil bewirkt. Sie war wie ein Klotz am Bein für Boris und die Preise wurden immer weniger, immer weniger.
Spanish courts ordered that if the debt went unpaid, the finca should be sold at auction.
As Boris's financial side of things were being assessed, this gentleman then goes up to the finca to get the value of the finca. So the guy goes in, tried to go into the master bedroom, but Boris had hid the horses in the bedroom because you have to pay taxes on the horses when he hadn't paid the taxes. But can you see the funny side of the story is because you walk into the bedroom and there's a horse. I'm sorry, I think that's funny.
Boris had to find the money, and fast.
Yeah, no, that'd be great. That'd be great.
John Caldwell made his fortune with Phones for You, a company he founded and sold in 2006.
Boris used his connections to secure a loan for £1.2 million from billionaire John Caldwell, but it came at a hefty interest rate, reported to be 25%.
So I wasn't even made aware of this loan until Mr. Caldwell told me himself. I didn't even know that he had borrowed money from friends. You don't tell your wife that. If that's something that you're going to be ashamed of, I think that is a business deal made between two friends. Should I have made aware of it? Depends on the relationship, I guess, between husband and wife, no? That was also none of my business, so there you go.
When Boris didn't repay Caldwell's loan, it was transferred to private bank Arbuthnot Latham, with interest now reported to have risen to 3.9 million euros. The debt would trigger his bankruptcy.
I was not really surprised when the news came up that Boris is bankrupt. Boris lived on a very high level. He had a very nice house, which was in Wimbledon, London. He was very generous as well. He was paying for everybody. He made expensive gifts. It's not the life of a normal person.
Is it good to be living in Paris? Yes, love Paris. I clearly remember the moment that he found out he was made bankrupt. I was in Wimbledon. Then I got the phone call, and then literally it just spiraled. The problem was that our personal life was crumbling, and that took more of an emotional toll on me than the bankruptcy. The day that I had made up my mind to file for divorce was definitely not the easiest one. All the cracks that we had in our marriage, I just felt that the respect and the honesty was just not there anymore. And I didn't file for divorce on a whim. And sadly, it became extremely public and extremely nasty and dirty.
The former Wimbledon tennis champion Boris Becker has been declared bankrupt. The 49-year-old owed a large sum to a firm of private bankers.
His lawyers are asking for a final chance to pay his debts by remortgaging a property in Mallorca.
Mr. Becker's advocate said the tennis star was not a sophisticated individual when it came to finances.
Boris suddenly announced he had taken on a new role. He'd agreed to be the attaché to the Central African Republic for sport, humanitarian and cultural affairs. A job which, in theory, would give him diplomatic immunity from any bankruptcy proceedings.
Back in the mid-1980s, Boris Becker was the Grand Slam-winning global poster boy for tennis. But since then, so much has gone wrong in his life.
Boris agreed to go on the Andrew Marr show.
Boris Becker, rather surprisingly, you suddenly became a diplomat working for the Central African Republic. How did that come about?
Well, I was approached by the president to help him improve the image, the reputation of this very difficult and poor country. And so in the ceremony in April, he made me the attaché for sports, culture and humanitarian affairs.
I remember him applying for the diplomatic passport. It was just made public that we had filed for divorce. And he showed me the photo, the passport. I thought he had lost touch with reality, but he also seemed like a very desperate man trying to find a solution.
Many people think you are using this, perhaps cynically, as a way to get out of the bankruptcy proceedings, claiming diplomatic immunity, as you now can.
That's correct, but one has nothing to do from the other.
A lot of people learned that Boris is constructing his own world. He is believing in what he is doing and saying, even if it's not true.
Have you ever been to the Central African Republic?
I haven't been yet. I've been very busy with my tennis engagement the last few weeks.
Ja, total peinlich.
Boris Becker n'est pas détenteur d'un passeport diplomatique centrafricain. Le document qu'il a produit est un faux qui a été confirmé par le ministère des Affaires étrangères.
The Central African Republic's foreign minister declared Boris's passport fake, matching the serial number to a stolen badge. Boris was unaware he had been scammed. He eventually dropped the claim for diplomatic immunity. The Insolvency Service instructed Boris to appoint trustees to assess his finances and work out how to pay off his debts.
Well, Mr. Becker was declared bankrupt 2 years ago. It's the nature of a bankruptcy that your assets, or certainly surplus assets, become available to your creditors. The process is those assets vest in the trustee in bankruptcy, and then it falls on them to retain specialists in order to sell them.
The trustees found that Boris had failed to disclose assets, making his insolvency now a criminal matter.
I got a phone call from my clerk saying, oh, a new case has just come in. Defendant's name is Boris Becker. And I remember saying, oh, that's a bit of a coincidence. And he said, no, it is. It is actually Boris Becker. As a kid, I saw him play in the flesh at Wimbledon. Mr. Becker hadn't been entirely truthful with regards to his bankruptcy proceedings. That was demonstrated by the way in which he was either not making full disclosure to the trustees, and also in terms of monies being transferred and assets being concealed. When you get the case, you start looking at it. You just start putting two and two together and saying, well, hang on a minute. This is what was said to the trustee, but I know from looking at that other exhibit that he knew about it, even though he told the trustee he didn't. And it just all begins to form a story and form a picture. And you think, oh, hang on, I think I see what's going on here.
It took the Crown 3 years to build a case against Boris. In 2022, it went to trial. Boris arrived at court hand in hand with his new girlfriend.
Morning, Boris. How are you feeling ahead of today? You got anything to say before you go in? I'll see you in court.
Mr. Becker's is entirely innocent of these charges and intends to defend himself vigorously and clear his name. Until such time, we'd ask that you avoid any speculation in the media. Thank you.
It was a 3-week trial, and Boris was on the stand for 3 days.
My cross-examination really was based around disclosing things as he should have done to the trustee in bankruptcy. In other words, if you're not telling the truth now, you obviously weren't telling the truth back then.
The jury found him guilty of 4 of the 24 charges.
The 3-time Wimbledon men's singles champion, Boris Becker, is due to be sentenced for breaking UK insolvency laws.
The day of sentence was a very big story that, in theory, Boris Becker was going to prison. Having heard from both the defence and the prosecution, the judge passed a sentence of 2.5 years custody. Mr. Becker went down to the cells and that afternoon started his prison sentence.
The 3-time Wimbledon tennis champion, Boris Becker, is beginning a 2.5-year prison sentence for hiding millions of pounds in assets after being declared bankrupt.
Going to jail, which he never suspected, was the first time in the life of Boris which he could not control.
Das ist schon ein außergewöhnlicher Fall und wirklich der Mega-GAU im Leben von Boris Becker gewesen.
In her sentencing remarks, Judge Taylor said he'd shown no remorse, no humility, and had failed to heed the chances he was given from his past conviction for tax evasion 20 years ago in Germany.
And I remember the words of the judge saying that he showed no regard or no sympathy, this arrogance to the case. Whatever the judge said about him that she knew in about 2 weeks took me 13 years.
Der frühere Tennisstar Boris Becker ist in England aus der Haft entlassen worden, berichtet die Bild-Zeitung. Demnach kam er heute Morgen nach 7-monatiger Haft frei und soll nun nach Deutschland abgeschoben werden.
Boris was released early from prison after agreeing to a deportation, having served only a quarter of his sentence. As a foreign national, a strict condition of his release was that he is not allowed in the UK until autumn 2024. On leaving jail, he was reportedly flown to Germany by private jet and paid nearly €500,000 for his first exclusive interview.
Welcome. Describe the moment when you heard you'd be a free man.
You learn one thing is in prison is don't believe anything. So until I set foot in German soil, I didn't believe it.
What was the first thing that you did as a free man?
I thought about that moment a long time, and I needed to have a cold beer. Yeah, it was probably the best beer I had in my life.
I would like to talk about the verdict and the sentence. What went through your mind?
Yes, I was worried, but I was never desperate. I don't mind the fight. You win some and you lose some, and I lost that fight.
You're talking about the psychological side of the pressure.
When I heard that Boris was being released, I had split emotions. I have got to be the ultimate mother.
I felt sadness for Boris. I just think it's a path, whether it's real prison or a fake prison, that every star has to face. They have to let go of the old self and try to become somebody different from the limelight.
Boris is the most complete player that I've ever played. It's an incredible career. At the age of 17, to be able to do what he did, I don't know if anybody will ever see that again. You know, he was one heck of a player.
I think nothing will change because he has a very strong ego. And he's thinking 99.9% I. All his life, he was searching for relationship with media persons. He knows the game, and he will go on with that.
When you meet Boris Becker, he is amazingly charming. He was born to be the superstar. He's lived his life of fame on such a high level. It's like a drug. I wish him to succeed in whatever it is that he wishes to do. I hope he wishes the same for me.